Chains rattled against cold alloy flooring as Elias Cross was dragged into the center of the tribunal chamber. His boots, scuffed and scorched from untold miles across dead continents, left faint trails of ash behind him. The room, colossal and carved into obsidian black stone, curved upward into rows of alien dignitaries seated in silent judgment. Lights flickered from bioluminescent torches and crystalline prisms suspended midair, casting eerie shadows across their inhuman faces. Elias didn't look up. He had learned long ago that eye contact with sovereigns invited mockery or violence. Instead, he stared at the floor, breathing slow, letting the silence stretch. The air here smelled sterile, laced with ozone and pride. A voice boomed overhead, low and serpentine. Human designation Elias Cross. Last confirmed survivor of Earth. Charged with crimes of planetary suicide and interstellar deception. The speaker, Vokhtar the Venerated, towered in his throne, a 7-foot reptilian figure, draped in liquid gold robes, adorned with the skulls of extinct species. His tones slithered between disdain and amusement. Another sovereign chuckled, a stuttering, insectoid trill. A primitive wrapped in skin, barely worth the chains he wears. The laughter rippled through the chamber. Elias finally lifted his head. He didn't speak. Not yet. He simply met Vokhtar's eyes, calm, steady, hollow as the scorched moon that now orbited his ruined planet. Vokhtar leaned forward, his voice softening with feigned curiosity. Tell us, Elias. Was it pride? Was it stupidity? Or did your species simply grow bored with survival? Elias tilted his head. His voice, when it came, was hoarse but razor-edged. You want me to explain Earth's fall? You studied it, documented it. You parked your satellites above our graves and fed off the ruins like carrion. You misunderstand, Vokhtar said almost pleasantly. We mock to understand. It is our way. Then you understand nothing. Elias smiled faintly. But you will. A thin sovereign near the edge of the tribunal raised a glowing data rod. Our scans detect unusual neural activity, elevated brainwave harmonics, pulse patterns consistent with resonance. Vokhtar's gaze narrowed. You've been transmitting. I've been remembering, Elias corrected. Earth isn't dead. It's just listening. A hiss ran through the chamber. Vokhtar dismissed it with a wave. Poetic nonsense. Your planet is a husk. A crater with atmosphere. Elias closed his eyes. For a moment, he let himself drift. Not away, but inward. He could feel it again. The heartbeat. Slow. Deep. Not a sound, but a pulse, like the rumble of tectonic plates beneath flesh. He remembered standing in the wastelands of what used to be Colorado, barefoot in the ash, and feeling it for the first time. The soil whispering. The sky responding. Earth, not just dying, but aware. Vokhtar rose, his robe shimmering. Your kind burned your world and begged the stars for mercy. And when we came, you offered threats. Delusions of grandeur. Elias stood straight now. His chains clinked but did not drag. You didn't come to help. You came to observe. You watched us fall, mocked our pain, and recorded it like a theater performance. You all did. Several sovereigns began murmuring, their expressions shifting from amusement to irritation. The tension in the room thickened. A jagged voice cut through. This is a waste of tribunal time. Execute him, and return to more pressing matters. The human is a relic. Careful, Elias said, his voice suddenly cold. Relics hold memory, and memory holds power. Vokhtar narrowed his glowing slits of eyes. Do you think yourself a symbol, Elias Cross? A martyr? A messiah? No, Elias stepped forward slowly, the guards uncertain now. I'm a message. The lights dimmed, just for a heartbeat, but every sovereign in the chamber noticed it. A flicker in the energy grid, a distortion in the air. One whispered EMP. Another tapped frantically at a neural interface, but it responded with static. Elias let them squirm. You assumed Earth was finished because the skies stopped screaming. You assumed humanity was gone because we stopped answering your broadcasts. But Earth doesn't forget, and it never forgives. Vokhtar's voice sharpened. What did you do? Elias looked directly at him now, eyes bright with something more than defiance, something ancient, something burning just beneath the skin. I listened. I carried Earth's grief, and it carried me in return. Suddenly, the chamber's walls trembled. It was subtle, barely more than a shiver. But every sovereign in the tribunal felt it, the kind of vibration that traveled through the marrow, not just the metal. A harmonic frequency not generated by machines, but by the living world itself. A sovereign to Vokhtar's left muttered, "This can't be possible. Earth's surface is inert, radioactive." "No," Elias said, cutting him off. "It's angry." The alarms didn't blare. The systems didn't scream. They simply failed. One by one, the glowing prisms above the tribunal dimmed, their soft hums silenced. The floor grew warmer underfoot. The stars visible through the dome flickered, not from distance, but from interference. Elias closed his eyes and whispered to the chamber, almost tenderly. "You should have listened instead of laughed." Vokhtar barked something in an alien tongue. Guards rushed forward. Elias did not move. The power cut entirely. Darkness swallowed the tribunal. And in the silence, far beneath the ash-choked crust of the planet below, something began to stir. Not a weapon, not a machine, a memory, a wrath, a voice older than metal, louder than silence. And it had just woken up. Elias opened his eyes. They glowed. The dead wind rolled across the Colorado wastes like a whisper, trying to remember how to scream. Blackened trees jutted out from cracked ground like broken ribs, and the sky was the color of rusted iron. Elias cross-moved through it alone, wrapped in a faded survival cloak that had once belonged to his father. The fabric, now patchworked with ash and soot, barely held warmth, but it carried memory. He stepped carefully, as though afraid the earth might wake beneath his feet. In truth, it already had. Each step over the crumbled highway hummed with something deeper than vibration, an unspoken resonance buried in the crust. It wasn't seismic. It wasn't mechanical. It was rhythmic. Alive. He'd first noticed it a year after the collapse, when the last broadcasts fell silent and the stars turned their backs. Cities became tombs, and tombs became dust. But the earth had started whispering. Back then, he thought it was madness. Hunger, grief, isolation. But the longer he listened, the more the whispers made sense, not in language, but in feeling. Not in thought, but in instinct. Earth was wounded, and it remembered who had wounded it. He stopped at the edge of what had once been Garden Point Military Reserve. Now it was little more than melted fences and scorched bunkers fused into slag by orbital bombardments. But deep beneath it, for miles straight down, was what his father had called the last promise of Earth. Dr. Marcus Cross hadn't been a soldier. He was a geotechnical physicist, obsessed with subcrustal resonance and the idea that planetary cores might exhibit emergent consciousness under extreme duress. Most called him a romantic, others a lunatic. Elias had once thought the same, until he saw his father torn in half by a drone strike while trying to protect a buried vault labeled Project Gaenrath. Even now, years later, the name gave Elias pause. It sounded like desperation disguised as defiance. But if what he had seen in the tribunal was real, if the tremors, the flickers, the low thrum in his bones were truly echoes of the system beneath his feet, then maybe his father was wrong. He knelt, brushing aside the ash until his fingers hit metal. A rusted hatch, pockmarked by age and radiation. His pulse accelerated. Earth's did too. Elias touched the panel with both palms. A sharp prick at the base of his spine signaled the biosync, something old, dormant, hungry for recognition. Lights spark around the hatch, flickering dim green. The ground beneath him groaned. He spoke aloud, not to the system, but to the dirt. "I'm still listening." A faint pulse answered, traveling up his arms and into his chest. It wasn't mechanical. It was more like a heartbeat echoing his own. The hatch slid open with a hiss that felt like a sigh, revealing a descent tunnel lit by dim blue veins of geothermal energy. He dropped down and began the climb into the Earth's throat. Each rung took him deeper into silence, but not into stillness. The walls here vibrated softly, like vocal cords too large to speak. The further he descended, the more his thoughts unraveled, not in fear, but in memory. He saw his father's eyes, the way they used to light up when speaking of resonance fields and harmonic geostructures. The Earth, Marcus once said, isn't just a planet. It's a memory engine. It stores pain like blood stores trauma. At the time, Elias had rolled his eyes. Now he wasn't so sure. After nearly an hour of descent, the shaft opened into a colossal chamber, circular, metallic, and dimly lit. Machinery hung from the ceiling like vines. In the center, a sphere floated, 12 feet in diameter, suspended in midair by unseen forces. It rotated slowly, layered in shifting light and shadow. The sphere wasn't made of metal or stone. It pulsed like a muscle. Alive, breathing, Gaenrath. his father's final design. The system was never meant to be activated by warheads or politics. It was keyed to something deeper, bio-emotional harmonics, the collective despair of a species. A psychic scream channeled through chosen vessels. And Elias, for reasons he still didn't understand, had become its final amplifier. He stepped toward the sphere, and it responded with light. Lines of energy spread through the floor, revealing ancient circuitry buried beneath stone and time. His chest tightened. "I don't want revenge," he said aloud, though no one was listening. "I just want them to understand." The sphere pulsed in reply, not language, but agreement. Back in the tribunal, he'd watched their faces when the first tremor hit. They hadn't expected anything. To them, humanity was finished, buried beneath its own ash and arrogance. But what they failed to realize was that Earth never needed ships or fleets. It was never about domination. It was about endurance. And pain. Pain remembered. Pain weaponized. He activated the first relay with a gesture. A wave of energy surged upward, not as an attack, but as a warning. The skies above Earth would blacken. The satellites monitoring the surface would burn out. And the stars would blink, unsure if they were witnessing rebirth or wrath. Elias felt the connection intensify. It was no longer subtle. The Earth's anger surged through him, and he staggered, breath caught in his throat. It wasn't rage like fire. It was colder, like pressure building beneath stone, waiting for a crack to become a fracture. He gasped. "Not yet. Just show them we're awake." The sphere slowed its pulse. The chamber dimmed. He stood there in the quiet, knowing this was only the beginning. The tribunal would react. They would send drones, ships, threats. But they would come with fear behind their arrogance now. And when they knelt, if they knelt, it would not be before Elias. It would be before Earth itself. As he ascended the tunnel once more, Elias felt something shift within him. He wasn't just carrying memory anymore. He was part of it. The last echo of a world that had been mocked, buried, and dismissed. He had no illusions about survival. He knew he was a fuse, not the fire. But the fire was coming. Aboard the tribunal citadel, high above Earth's orbit, the atmosphere was no longer one of certainty. The air had shifted, dense now, laced with an edge no sensor could record. Vaktar stood motionless, his golden robe draping across the cold stone balcony as he stared down at the blue-gray marble of Earth. It hadn't changed its color. It still looked dead, but the stillness was gone. He tapped the side of his skull, initiating a silent neural command. "Status on atmospheric anomalies," he snapped. A pale-skinned tech creature flickered into view, insectal wings tucked under its ceremonial armor. "My lord," solar sensors picked up a polarity inversion along Earth's magnetic field. All orbital satellites within the debris belt are non-responsive. Vaktar's slitted pupils constricted. "Inversion of that magnitude hasn't occurred in recorded history," the technician finished grimly. Below them, Earth pulsed. Inside the chamber, Elias Cross stood unshackled. The guards who had once flanked him now lay collapsed in twitching heaps, felled not by violence, but by a wave of unfiltered electroneural feedback. He hadn't moved, hadn't needed to. The resonance from the Gaian system still buzzed in his bloodstream, subtle as static and just as persistent. The pulse was getting stronger. Earth was no longer listening. It was speaking. "You mock us because we didn't leave the cradle," Elias said, eyes fixed on Vaktar. "But you forget what's born in the cradle first learns to scream." Vaktar turned slowly, his voice now lacking the silk of superiority. "This is a breach of peace accords. A war crime in progress." Elias laughed quietly. "Was peace ever offered? You scavenged our ruins. You called us feral. You broadcast our extinction as entertainment across 6 systems." Another sovereign stood, Jorin Cal, smaller and more restrained in tone, his lavender-gray skin shimmering with alarm. "What do you want, human? What's your demand?" Elias met his gaze. "I didn't come with demands. I came with memory. And Earth came with consequence." A tremor rippled through the chamber, followed by a low, sonorous hum that made the very walls seem to breathe. Lights flickered again. This time they didn't recover. On the surface of Earth, unseen beneath layers of ruined cityscapes and fused bedrock, enormous structures were awakening, reactive tectonic nodes grown into the crust like planetary nerve endings. Project Gaian Wrath was no orbital superweapon. It was a network of natural resonance, designed not to destroy ships, but to cripple them through electromagnetic pulses, gravitational lensing, atmospheric disruption. Above the tribunal station, the stars blinked. Elias felt the change before any sensor could detect it. His skin crawled. The back of his neck prickled. His voice dropped to a murmur. It's starting. The outer rim of Earth's orbit, once cluttered with relic satellites, surveillance buoys, and supply drones, burst into chaos. One by one, systems shorted. Metal turned brittle. Ship hulls began to crumple inward, as if pulled by unseen hands. Magnetic turbulence coiled around them, spinning them like toys, flinging them apart. In the tribunal's command spire, emergency glyphs lit up in frantic red, and sovereign engineers screamed in a dozen languages. Vaktar barked commands, but none were heeded. The station's defense grid had gone offline. Shield harmonics failed to stabilize. Gravity wells, once locked and balanced, now surged unpredictably. Cut the earthward feed. Vaktar roared, but there was no feed left to cut. Jorinkel stumbled forward, reaching for Elias. Stop it. Whatever you're channeling, it's destabilizing everything. Elias didn't move. I'm not doing this. Earth is. I asked it not to kill you outright. That was my only request. A klaxon wailed across the tribunal's walls, a long, mournful sound that hadn't been heard in over a century. It was the fail-safe tone, reserved only for station-wide evacuation orders. Elias turned to Vaktar. Now do you see it? You mocked the species. But it wasn't just me you condemned. It wasn't just humans. It was Earth. You gave birth to your own destruction. Vaktar shouted, rage now thinned by fear. No, Elias said quietly. You gave it purpose. The resonance in his chest had begun to change. Sharpening. The connection was growing unstable. He could feel his heartbeat sinking too tightly with the pulse of the planet, his thoughts tinged with static. Each second he stayed in this place, the more Earth flowed into him. And Earth was angry. He gritted his teeth. He had to stay grounded, himself, not the conduit. Outside, the Sovereign's fleet repositioned. Hundreds of warships, each a monument to some empire, shifted into an attack pattern above Earth's equator. Plasma arrays charged. Missile silos opened like jaws. And the sky replied. The atmosphere convulsed. Lightning arced from orbit to stratosphere in patterns unnatural and deliberate. Cloud formations took on spiral geometries. Wind currents defied Coriolis logic. Then came the wave, not water but magnetism, an invisible tsunami that struck the fleet like a hammer of gods. Ship hulls crumpled. Engines imploded. Whole flagships blinked from existence, not with explosions, but with soundless collapse. The Sovereigns didn't just lose ships. They lost systems, navigation, propulsion, weapons, all silenced in perfect synchrony. As if the planet itself had blinked and technology had simply ceased to matter. Inside the tribunal, silence fell again. Elias stood alone, surrounded by ash from fallen lights. The floor cracked beneath his boots. Jorinkel whispered, stunned, How? Elias looked at him, eyes weary. You built empires with steel and stars. We built ours in grief, in dirt, in memory. Earth isn't a place. It's a force. Vaktar dropped to one knee, not out of reverence but exhaustion. The arrogance had finally bled from his voice. What will it take to stop this? Elias paused. He felt the pressure of Earth inside him, like a tide demanding to rise higher. He breathed through it, anchored himself to the memory of his father's voice, steady and quiet. I don't know if it can stop, Elias admitted. You've wounded it too deeply. But maybe, if you stop mocking what you don't understand, if you listen, maybe it will listen back. Above them, the void was filled with the drifting corpses of sovereign vessels, still glowing like ghosts. Earth did not roar. It didn't need to. Its silence had become the loudest threat in the galaxy. Elias staggered. His hands trembled. The bond was consuming more of him now, his body just a fragile shell for the voice of a world too long silenced. He would not last much longer. But for now he remained standing. And Earth, through him, remained watching. The chamber reeked of failure and ionized air. Broken conduits sparked along the walls, flickering in rhythm with the dying power cores beneath the tribunal. The Grand Hall, once the most sacred gathering point of the sovereign elite, now lay in fragments, cracked open like a fossil to the stars. Smoke drifted upward into the fractured dome, where the stars shimmered faintly beyond the graveyard of warships still burning in silent orbit. Elias Cross stood in the center of it all, shoulders heaving, his boots ankle-deep in dust and debris. Blood dripped from his left hand, though he didn't know when he'd been cut. The bond was taking its toll. The Earth's resonance was no longer just a whisper in his bones. It had become a tidal force, roaring through him, reshaping every thought, every breath, every heartbeat. He wasn't sure how much of him remained human anymore. But he was sure of this. They had heard. Vokhtar crawled from behind a shattered obsidian column, the golden trim of his once immaculate robes now blackened and torn. His voice trembled, not with rage, but disbelief. "What are you?" Elias turned to face him. His eyes were dim now, not from exhaustion, but from overexposure. He had seen too much, heard too much. The weight of a planet's fury could not be borne for long. "I'm what you created," he said softly. "You called Earth a grave, and so it became one, for your fleets, your pride, your certainty." Jorin Kal stumbled to Vokhtar's side, his face pale, his expression one of raw horror. "We didn't know. We couldn't have." "You chose not to know," Elias interrupted. "You saw ruins and laughed. You saw silence and mistook it for surrender. You mocked the last voice of a dying world and forgot that some things do not die quietly." The floor vibrated beneath them, not from structural failure, but from purpose. The Gaian signal, once buried under kilometers of soil, was now flooding every frequency known to the sovereigns. Not as an attack, but a message. All across the galactic core, the story of Earth's awakening would spread. Ships drifting in dead space. Empires losing contact with entire sectors. Machines refusing to obey. And always, always that signal pulsing underneath it all. Heartbeat, breath, grief, fire. Vokhtar fell to his knees. His claws trembled as they touched the scorched floor. He did not speak. It was not enough. "You wanted humanity to beg," Elias said, walking forward, his voice hollow. "You made us a myth. You turned our extinction into performance. Now you'll be remembered not for conquest, but for humiliation." He gestured toward the fractured dome. Beyond it, the stars flickered behind the veil of Earth's wrath. "You'll be remembered as the ones who knelt." Slowly, painfully, Vokhtar bent forward and pressed his forehead to the ground. One by one, the surviving sovereigns followed. Jorin Kal was the last. He hesitated, breathing fast, as though struggling against instinct, against thousands of years of rule and rulemaking. Then he, too, knelt in the shadow of a man they had once called broken. The pulse eased. Elias gasped as if rising for air. The pressure behind his eyes lifted, the roar in his ears dimming to a low hum. Earth was not appeased, but was watching, waiting. "I don't want your surrender," Elias said. "I want your memory. Etch this into every archive, every child's lesson, every whispered tale, on every world. Tell them what happens when you mock the wounded. Tell them about the day the Earth answered." He stumbled. His knees buckled. The fire within him had begun to burn too hot, his cells pulsing with unnatural rhythm. Earth's connection had been forged with trauma, with the emotional ruins of a species nearly obliterated. It was a bond meant for vengeance, not survival. Jorin Kal moved forward instinctively. "Elias." "Don't," Elias whispered. "This was never meant to be lived through." He dropped to one knee, breath shallow. The stone beneath him warmed, not with fire, but with life. Small cracks spread outward, and from them sprouted thin green vines, fragile and defiant. They coiled around the broken tiles, reaching upward toward light that wasn't there. Vokhtar watched, silent. There was no grandeur left in him, no authority. Elias pressed his hand to the floor. The vines moved faster now, wrapping around his arm, like a child clinging to a parent. "This is what we were," he said. "Not perfect, not immortal, but alive. We made gardens out of ash." His body began to tremble. The resonance spiked, then dipped. The feedback was reaching its end. There was nothing left to hold it back. "I carried it as far as I could," he murmured. And then he fell. No final cry, no dramatic collapse. Just a stillness, like the earth had drawn him home. The vines covered his chest, blooming with soft yellow light. Silence reclaimed the chamber. Above the ruined planet, the fires dimmed. The gravitational flux relaxed. Ships, what few remained, drifted, powerless but spared. On distant worlds, broadcasts resumed. But the static never fully disappeared. Some said it was interference. Others prophecy. The sovereigns rebuilt over time. They rewrote policies, redrew maps. They told their young of a world that remembered its pain and used it to set the sky on fire. They called it the kneeling. And though no human voice ever answered again, the stars were never quite the same. Because somewhere in the ashes of a forgotten blue planet, something had awoken, and it would never sleep again.